The Oval Office can brand a weak man as strong, or expose a giant as mortal before the ink is dry. America has crowned 46 presidents, yet a handful keep returning in the quiet verdict of historians. Not popularity contests, but consequence measured in war survived, rights expanded, and institutions bent without breaking. What follows is not a coronation. It is a walk through 10 lives that collided with history at full speed and the price tags nobody could fully hide. The rankings shift with every generation, yet the same names surface, because their fingerprints sit on the machinery of the republic: taxes and tariffs, rights and armies, silence and speech. Hold that tension while the stories unfold. Picture the ledger: some names built the frame, others repaired it after war, and a few expanded who could stand inside the door. The cost is not always printed beside the achievement. The list is not a beauty contest, it is a stress test of power under pressure. Rankings argue, but the constants remain: who preserved the Union, who set limits, who fed the hungry, who faced the bomb. Each name below is a chapter where the country changed shape. At the time, no one realized how narrow the window really was. The Union was splitting in 1761, and Abraham Lincoln stepped into a storm that had been gathering for decades. He did not enter as a saint. He entered as a lawyer from Illinois, carrying a fractured country and a constitution that still tolerated human bondage. But that was not the real turning point. The turning point was what he became under fire: a commander who learned war in real time, a politician who paid in blood for every compromise that failed, and finally a president who issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Not magic, not instant freedom everywhere, but a war measure aimed at Confederate-held territory, and a moral earthquake that reframed the fight. At Gettysburg in 1863, he spoke in a few minutes of consecrated ground and unfinished work, language that still feels carved into stone. The war erased illusions faster than speeches could comfort anyone. Lincoln accepted measures that alarmed civil libertarians of his day, including expanded executive authority during rebellion. Because survival and principle were colliding in real time, historians still argue the balance, but the through line is clear: he bet the Union on more than geography. What came next was even more significant. Lincoln pushed for the 13th Amendment to end slavery nationwide, and he never saw the peace he bought with his life. John Wilkes Booth cut that story short in 1865, and the nation inherited both victory and unfinished work. But that was not the end of the American experiment, because someone had to invent the office before anyone could save the Republic. George Washington took power in 1789, knowing eyes were on him like a king in a world full of kings. He could have clung, he chose limits. He built a cabinet, weathered factions, sent troops to put down the Whiskey Rebellion while insisting on lawful authority, and stepped down after 2 terms. He signed the Jay Treaty to avoid another war Britain could have forced sooner, trading popularity for breathing room. What looked like calm was calculation. In his farewell address, he warned against permanent alliances and partisan fury, as if he could already hear tomorrow's fights. Then something unexpected happened. The young country did not collapse into dictatorship, it learned rhythm. Washington's legacy is not charisma alone. It is precedent as a kind of civic technology. The nation still measures presidents against the standard Washington set when he walked away from power. What happened next changed everything for citizens crushed by fear and hunger. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt entered the White House as the economy lay in ruins and democracy itself looked fragile worldwide. Banks failed, breadlines stretched, and Roosevelt's first 100 days exploded with experimental programs. The New Deal stitched banks, jobs, agriculture, and labor rights into a new federal presence. Social Security arrived as a promise across generations. Controversial then, foundational later. The court-packing fight bruised him, yet institutions bent and held. Disability shaped his public image behind a desk, while willpower shaped policy in public view. Historians debate how much each program healed on its own, but the emotional fact is undeniable. Millions felt the government finally move. And then something unexpected happened again. World War II pulled the United States from isolation into arsenal and ally. Lend-Lease fed allies before formal entry. After Pearl Harbor, mobilization turned industry into a weapon. Roosevelt led the alliance against fascism, died in office in 1945, and left a stronger America and a world order still argued about today. Public fear could have surged toward authoritarian answers. Roosevelt steered instead toward reform, imperfect and contested, but still recognizable as democratic response. But that was not the real turning point for every kind of power. Thomas Jefferson wrote words that could outlive any administration: equality as an ideal in the Declaration, even as his own life contradicted it. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 doubled the nation's map and ignited endless debate over expansion and sovereignty. He sent Lewis and Clark westward into a continent of nations and landscapes not empty, though maps often pretended otherwise. The Embargo Act tried to punish Britain and France without open war and hurt American merchants instead. Proof that even luminous minds misread the tide. Jefferson's presidency is brilliance and contradiction pressed together. Visionary architect, slaveholder, philosopher. King of a republic still arguing with itself. James Madison is quieter on a monument, louder in law. Often called the father of the Constitution, he helped design the system of checks that makes American government a machine of friction on purpose. His War of 1812 brought the British to Washington, where flames swallowed public buildings and humiliation surged through the Capitol. Then something unexpected happened. American identity hardened in defeat's echo, and the war tested whether the Republic could fight without dissolving. At Hartford, New England anger flirted with disunion talk, and the war's end at Ghent returned borders without clear victory, messy, human, unresolved. James Monroe arrived in the era of good feelings with a nation still healing from war. His name now anchors a doctrine announced in 1823, a warning to European powers against new colonization in the Americas, framed as protection for republics in a hemisphere the United States increasingly imagined as its sphere. Monroe toured the country while nationalism swelled, a roadshow of unity that masked fractures waiting beneath the surface. What came next was even more significant in myth than in instant enforcement. The idea that the New World would not return to Old World empires on the same terms. Theodore Roosevelt turned the presidency into a spotlight and a lever. Trust-busting conservation of public lands, meat inspection, and cleaner food laws aimed at industrial squalor. The Panama Canal's staggering ambition. He believed a modern nation needed muscle and morals at once. He brokered an end to the Russo-Japanese War and took a Nobel Peace Prize back across the ocean, swagger paired with diplomacy. He was also a man of his era's blind spots, yet his energy made the office feel alive, almost restless, as if the White House could sprint. The ear hears glory, the record reads trade-offs. Every expansion of federal power arrived with arguments, court fights, and grief that outlasted speeches. Keep listening, not for applause, but for the echo of what had to be paid. Theodore Roosevelt inherited an overseas empire still being debated, and he moved with a pace that made expansion feel like destiny. Harry S. Truman inherited the bomb, the ruins of Europe, and a world map redrawn in smoke. In 1945, he ordered atomic strikes against Japan, a decision historians still weigh with moral gravity, framed at the time as ending a war that refused to stop costing lives. Truman also championed the Marshall Plan, helped birth NATO, ordered the Berlin airlift when blockade threatened a besieged city, and committed forces to Korea, turning America into a global guarantor with all the cost that role implies. Integration of the armed forces by executive order moved a segregated nation one hard notch forward, even as equality remained a distant shore. What happened next changed the texture of fear. Containment hardened into doctrine, and the line between protector and policeman blurred on maps Americans had never studied in school. Dwight D. Eisenhower looked like calm itself, but he carried D-Day in his bones. As president, he managed the early Cold War's hair-trigger terror, secured the Korean armistice, warned of the military-industrial complex in his farewell, and sent federal power to enforce desegregation in Little Rock when state defiance threatened the rule of law. When the Soviets launched Sputnik, American confidence wobbled, and Eisenhower's calm became its own kind of national medicine. Interstate concrete carried more than freight. It carried the promise of motion as freedom, and the shadow of communities cut through by asphalt. The interstate highway system reshaped American life distance, commerce, and time itself. Lyndon B. Johnson's domestic presidency surged through the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, through Medicare and Medicaid programs that rewrote daily life for millions. Then Vietnam's escalation stained his legacy and split the country he tried to lift. The Great Society expanded education and poverty programs into a vision of uplift. Then the guns of Vietnam drained the moral bandwidth those programs needed. The irony is brutal, moral ambition and strategic tragedy sharing the same desk. Some citizens felt rescued by law, others felt the nation had overreached. Historians split the difference with evidence. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, like the video and subscribe for more weekly breakdowns. The story does not end with 10 names. It ends with you recognizing that greatness in a republic is rarely pure, it is decision under pressure. Consequence delivered slowly, and memory argued over forever. Lincoln's unfinished work, Washington's restraint, Roosevelt's experiments, Truman's heavy choices, Eisenhower's warnings, Jefferson's ideals, Madison's architecture, Monroe's warning to empires. Theodore Roosevelt's motion, Johnson's triumph and wound, they do not ask for worship, they ask for clear eyes. And the next time power speaks from that office, remember, history does not reward noise. It rewards what survives the morning after. These 10 leaders didn't just lead a nation, they defined the American soul.